There's a lot of MMOs we know plenty of details about. Games that have been in open development for years, like Ashes of Creation and Pantheon, or even Monsters and Memories. We have a wealth of information about them, good and bad. Newer and bigger projects like Ghost from Ghostcrawler and Stars Reach from Raph Koster, we've gotten deep dives, blogs, and more. But there are other games that may be delving into the Warhammer universe, games that may be taking us to the Shire, that I really wish we knew more about. In fact, one of these games, I'm not even certain, will be an MMO. From globally known gigantic IPs getting their own MMO to lesser known IPs that are really just very important to me. I want to talk about some of the MMOs out there that I just wish I knew a little bit more about. A little bit more to know if I should keep my hopes up or if I should just give up on it. Let's start with the Warhammer MMO. Yeah, that's right, I said Warhammer. Another Warhammer MMO. One that's probably going to be Warhammer 40k, but we don't know for sure yet. I say Warhammer MMO instead of a Warhammer 40k MMO because, well, for a little while, it did seem like it was confirmed that the MMO in development from Jack Emmert of Jackalyptic Games was actually going to be from the 40k universe. A lot of that actually came from comments Jack made with Wargamer regarding Warhammer 40k, specifically where he talked over his favorite 40k factions. I even referred to it as Emmert's 40k MMO, but I wasn't alone. As you can see, a lot of people were assuming that this was going to be a 40k MMO. We may have jumped the gun a little bit, and I think also that might have partially been for a couple reasons. In fact, two big reasons why I still think this is going to be a 40k MMO versus a fantasy MMO. First is pretty obvious. Warhammer Fantasy has already been done as an MMO, and it kind of still exists as Return of Reckoning, although I don't think the existence of Return of Reckoning is something that any studio is going to be considering with, well, should we make this IP or not, given that it is a private server. But the other reason is perhaps even larger. Fantasy MMOs saturate the market. Standing out as a sci-fi MMO would generally be a lot easier when your competition is Star Trek Online, Star Citizen, which is still in development, and EVE Online, instead of Final Fantasy XIV, Guild Wars 2, and Elder Scrolls Online. And perhaps most importantly, World of Warcraft, which is still going strong with millions of players, and is essentially just a Warhammer Fantasy reskinned over the last several decades. That and the fact that, well, there's a lot of noise around Warhammer 40k right now with a potential new series coming from Henry Cavill, the new Warhammer 40k Space Marines 2 game coming out. There's a lot more movement behind Warhammer 40k at the moment than Warhammer Fantasy. Even though we got that Age of Sigmar game. But that's where most of our knowledge around this game ends. We know it will be published by NetEase, which is a bit of a red flag for monetization because they tend to be a very mixed bag with games like Naraka Blade Point and mobile games galore under their banner, but also the more recently well-received Once Human. We also know that it will be developed in Unreal Engine 5, and back in July of 2023, it was still in very early development. Their team was at about 45 people at that time, with goals to ramp up to around 100 to finish making the MMO. And it's most likely not going to be a PvP MMO, as Jack Emmert said in a Wargamer interview the following, quote, "I have never emphasized PvP. God bless all the games that depend on it. I don't know how to do it. If I play a PvP game and I lose several times in a row, I don't want to play anymore. Like, getting your head beaten isn't necessarily fun, and so you end up winnowing down your population. Safe to say, unless they hire someone who is absolutely a complete expert in PvP, I don't think you want a game leaning into PvP where the creative director or lead of the game doesn't understand or like PvP. But as long as they don't fuck this up, this MMO could be the dark horse of one of the biggest MMOs ever made because they have a built-in audience. 40k is a very long-running franchise with an entire library of books and all kinds of other media that will lead to people that are maybe not even interested in an MMO in general wanting to check it out. Kind of like when Star Wars Galaxies came out as an MMO in 2003, it brought in a whole new group of players into the MMO space, because it wasn't necessarily fans of MMOs that were going to play Star Wars Galaxies, although obviously many did, but also just fans of Star Wars that wanted to go play the next game that was Star Wars. And God, I just keep thinking back to when I worked at a bookstore in college, and I just had to keep like all these big heavy carts full, just completely full of only Warhammer 40k books. It took up like the whole freaking like stock of the sci-fi section was just Warhammer 40k books. Honestly, this may be staring down the largest potential built-in audience of any game, with the exception of World of Warcraft. And I say that because World of Warcraft built their audience well before World of Warcraft was ever a thing. They built their audience through Warcraft 1, 2, and 3, the RTS games that brought that embedded audience into the game. Warhammer 40k already has several other games that are building that audience right now as we talk. You have plenty of Warhammer 40k RTS games that were pretty well received when they first came out. And of course, the Space Marine series via Boltgun. There's a lot of Warhammer 40k stuff out there that will be that audience coming into the game. Just, pressure not to mess it up. But we've also seen how that goes when you already do have a built-in audience and you don't handle it well. If the first and third games on this list I have kind of cautious optimism about, well, this one I think firmly sits in the potentially throw that shit into Mordor camp, because I have so many concerns. My trust in Amazon Game Studios, I thought it had bottomed out, but it keeps bottoming out more, which sucks because I wanted to see a new company with a lot of resources come in and start making big budget MMOs again. And for those unaware, Amazon Game Studios is working with Embracer Group to make a new Lord of the Rings MMO. Yes, there is already a Lord of the Rings Online, a venerable MMO under Daybreak Games that continues to get expansions and updates and is beloved by the people that play it. That didn't seem to stop Amazon Games and Embracer wanting to make another one. But it wasn't easy. For those unaware, the Lord of the Rings MMO has gone through some difficult times. It got announced, then it got cancelled as a deal to make it fell through. Then it renewed with new rights shifting almost completely to Amazon to do it from Embracer. And I think one of the things that gives me the most hesitation here is not even just Amazon Game Studio. It's this unholy union between Embracer Group and Amazon Game Studio. It's almost, I guess, like Sauron and Saruman. Record profits, microtransactions, layoffs, investors, cosmetics, record profits. And I will not say sorry for all of the Lord of the Rings references and shit in here. I love that shit. But for Embracer, if you're unfamiliar with the name, you're probably familiar with the quote that will resound in the minds and hearts of gamers for a very, very long time, because it showed a lot. It was basically Embracer showing their whole ass to everybody to just be upfront about it. The quote was this: "Our overruling principle is to always maximize shareholder value in any given situation." Shareholders, not gamers, not developers, shareholders. Basically saying the not so quiet part out louder. But that's not all, because you gotta couple that with some tone-deaf comments about not using actors in video games from Amazon Game Studios, and a really botched communication on their floundering MMO New World as they tried to rebrand it for a new console market by kind of shoving the lingering PC player to the side and trying to woo a new love. As well as, of course, the cancellation of their publishing deal with the MMO Blue Protocol from Bandai Namco, which is now being officially closed, and there are concerns everywhere for the game. And that doesn't even get into the fact that Amazon Game Studio has launched exactly one game. They had a couple games, but they canceled them before launch, and they have published a couple games. They published Lost Ark, and if it doesn't get canceled, because who knows at this point, it already got delayed, but published Throne and Liberty. Okay, it's probably not going to get canceled. It'll release here soon. So that makes 2 games they have published, MMOs, and 1 they've made in New World, which now they're calling it an action RPG that defies genre, I guess. But with all those red flags, it's still Lord of the Rings. It's still Tolkien. And I'm still interested. I have a Hobbit tattoo. If it's got that IP, I am going to check it out, unless it's Gollum. So with the upcoming release of some new Peter Jackson movies for the Lord of the Rings, the Hunt for Gollum, I believe is the name, like directed by Andy Serkis, as well as the new War of Rohirrim anime that's coming in December of 2024. It could be a time when it's kind of ascendant again, that IP that has gone dormant a little bit since the last Hobbit movies came out, or before that when the Lord of the Rings movies came out. But as I talk more about this game, I feel like I'm almost be more excited for a single player, like a new Shadow of Mordor type game with the Nemesis system, than whatever MMO we get from Amazon Game Studios, because they don't even seem to know yet what their hook is for the MMO. Time will tell, but I don't expect this one anytime soon. At least, I hope don't expect anytime soon, because they should know what they want to make the game at this point, I think. But our next two games, I really want to know more. Light No Fire looked a whole lot like a fantasy world-based version of No Man's Sky from Hello Games and had a very splashy reveal, much like No Man's Sky had a splashy reveal that led to a disappointing release, followed by years of content pushes and the developer just frankly not giving up on the game. Not until the game found an adoring fan base that actually made it win awards long after it had been released. No Man's Sky is a testament to a developer continuing to work on a game, even after a disappointing launch that didn't meet expectations. And with Light No Fire, the second game, we don't know what we're getting. We don't even know if this will be a true MMO. Honestly, if that's even a thing that exists, because if you ask 10 people what an MMO is, you'll probably get 10 different answers. But the intrigue is certainly there. A game the size of a planet, an interactable changing world of an entirely new fantasy IP. Count me in, at least to try it out, and maybe drop it after a month because it didn't tickle my fancy, but at least I want to try it. I'm excited and interested in seeing another approach from a new company in the space, an approach to how they want to build out the MMO. We just don't know what that is yet. We don't know what the core concepts would be. We can make assumptions. We can look at No Man's Sky and say, well, it might be just like fantasy that. It might be a pseudo MMO that has a lot of, crafting, survival, harvesting, but we don't actually know that. Anything we're doing here is just guesswork based on the history of the company. And that doesn't always work out. But while we wait for even just a glimmer of news from Hello Games, another trailer, a blog post, something that tells us a little bit about what their core philosophies and tenets are, we can fill in the space with whatever we dream of for an MMO at least. And then probably get completely disappointed because as MMO players, our expectations are exponentially more than realistic. At least mine are. I want a perfect MMO. This next one, I'm trying to temper expectations, but it's hard because I've been waiting well over a decade for it. I have to end with Everquest 3, don't I? Or perhaps 4, given that Everquest Online Adventure exists. This is probably the second or third attempt at making a new Everquest MMO, and we're not really sure just how firm the ground is that the game is on right now. We know that from EG7 investor documents, Everquest, the IP specifically, has repeatedly been talked up as their most valuable owned IP. That's notable given that other IPs under EG7 that are probably much more valuable are not theirs. Like Lord of the Rings Online, which of course has upcoming competition from the other MMO on this list. Dungeons & Dragons Online, which already has its own competition with Neverwinter. And then with Hasbro already talking up with the success of Baldur's Gate 3, how much they want to really push that Dungeons & Dragons IP, who knows what we'll have in the coming future. If there will be something that could take away some of that shine from a DDO beyond Neverwinter Nights. And then of course you have DCUO, which is a surprisingly successful MMO, but is of course not an owned IP by EG7. And EG7 was going to make a Marvel MMO, so that was interesting, but that got canceled too. But Everquest is their IP. They own the Everquest IP because they purchased it from Columbus Nova, who purchased it from Sony Online, who purchased it. Basically, it gets convoluted mess, but all you need to know is that the Everquest IP is under EG7 now, which owns Daybreak. And from that, we kind of have a rough idea of what kind of budget they were looking at, as they stated it'd be north of $35 million to make the game, as well as some guideposts of just what exactly they're looking at when they're trying to make the game, because they pointed to From Software. Not from a difficulty standpoint or a gameplay standpoint, but more about how From Software has a formula they use and how they take that formula and they iterate on it. And instead of making something brand new every time, they just keep making essentially the same game, but with some changes, making it a faster and cheaper way to make the next iteration. Which all of that leads me to think that an Everquest 3 now would not be attempting the grandiose scope and all of the changes of Everquest Next. Instead, perhaps it'll be closer to the games they already know how to make, the games they already have the infrastructure for, the games they already have the devs for. With Everquest hitting 25 years and Everquest 2 clocking in at 20 years, I think we're about as primed as we could be for a new Everquest MMO. But it might be a wiser path for EG7 to instead invest in a smaller game, using the IP for a bit to rebuild it in the consciousness. An RPG or an RTS, maybe even a survival craft like an Enshrouded. It wouldn't be the first time North had graced such titles, as we got 2 action RPGs in the form of Champions of North 1 and 2, as well as an RTS called Lords of Everquest. Those sort of games would be much cheaper than an entire MMO, and I'm sure beloved by the fans of the IP, as long as they were, well, not shit. But that doesn't seem to be where we're going. Everything we've heard from investment calls and digging into hiring, as well as straight up confirmation at panels from Darkpaw, looks like they're leaning toward a new MMO, and they're still currently hiring for it. The first investment document confirmation we got for an Everquest 3 said ideation for the game would start in 2025. And if that's the case, it's very possible, if this project keeps going, we'll get more information on its chances of survival in a tough gaming market in the next year or so. We just don't know yet what kind of game they would be making. And I think in part, we don't know yet because they don't know yet. Whatever the case, fans of Everquest like myself, people that kind of grew up on the game, hell, we're probably going through our upteenth, progression server, or whittling away our time on Project 99 or on Project Quarm, and really just waiting for that next journey into Noreth that we've been waiting for and longing for. We'll likely be holding our breath, hoping that this does not get canceled too. Because Noreth is a place that we all want to go back to in some way, form, or fashion. In fact, some way, form, or fashion. In fact, EG7, if anyone from EG7 or Darkpaw is watching this or listening to this, give us a port for Champions of Noreth 1 and 2. What is the harm? What's the harm in letting us play those games? I mean, just let us go play in Noreth a little bit. I know the story is a little wonky. It's probably a little bit dated, but let us go play. Just let us play. Let us know down in the comment section below, what game do you wish you knew more about? Whether it's one of these or a completely different one. Or what game are you just excited about? My name is Edward Flynn. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Or evening. Or night. I have no idea when you're actually watching this.